A further little step we have to take before actually describing normal forms are the different terms used in relational databases, commonly known as jargon. Technical jargon is a term applied to terms within a particular field which are specific to that field and may not necessarily have an Oxford English Dictionary meaning. A table is actually a structure in a relational database used to contain data. It's like a struct definition in the C programming language. Essentially the same thing. It's an array definition. A row or tuple is the thing duplicated in a table. A table is the structure, and then every time you insert some data consistent with that structure, in other words, one iteration, it becomes a row. So you can have many rows per table as you can have many tables in a database or data model. Column, field, or attribute are terms applied to the structures within each row in a table. In other words, a table is the structure. It's broken up into fields such as the customer name, the customer ID, his invoice number, the amount for the invoice, where he lives, what is currency, how much he spent, etc., etc., etc. Each of those are columns, fields, or attributes within the tables. And the row is applied to the iteration of those multiple columns in the table. So every row has a specific column structure or columnar structure, multiple columns within the table, etc., etc. Key versus an index. Very important to actually describe the difference between these two terms in terms of a relational database. They're actually the same thing, however, they are different because a key implies referential integrity or uniqueness or some kind of constraint. An index, on the other hand, doesn't have to be a constraint. It can just be a sorted order used when reporting. So, for instance, if I had a customer table, I could uniquely identify each customer by the name of the customer. That would actually be a key. Specifically, it would probably be a primary or a unique key. However, if I wanted to run a report that gave me all the balances for all customers in a particular state in the United States, then I would possibly want to go into the table and search by state name. So therefore, I could create an index on the state name. Note, this index does not determine the uniqueness or any type of restriction or constraint setting on the data in that table. It simply gives me a sorted order. An index is essentially a copy of data within whatever you specify in the index, such as the state name, which is a section of the table physically much smaller than the table. Very distinct difference between a key and an index, even though it's subtle, but it does exist. It's important to understand it. Primary key is generally a key implying referential integrity and uniqueness applied to a table to uniquely identify each row or iteration of table structure within a table. As I said, a customer. You can uniquely identify a customer by the name of the customer. Because of trademark restrictions and rules, generally a company cannot have the same name. So you are very unlikely to have two customers with the same name unless you use the customer's first and last name. Well, then you could have a customer with the same name, such as a telephone company. Telephone companies typically uniquely identify customers by their phone number or some kind of unique account number. They don't use the customer name because there is a possibility of duplicating it. Primary key uniquely identifies a table row within a table. A foreign key is a copy of a primary key in a sub-related entity. So, for instance, if you had a customer and he had invoices and you created two entities where the customer was the static information and the invoice is the transactional stuff, such that you always keep your customers, but you don't keep your invoices after a year, you delete them, and every customer can have multiple invoices issued to him, either because he's not paying or because he buys lots of stuff on an ongoing basis. The customer table would contain a primary key, such as the customer name, uniquely identifying the customer, and the invoice table would have to have a reference back to the customer table. It would have a foreign key, which would actually be a copy of the primary key on the customer table. The customer name would be in the invoice table. That would be the foreign key. Referential integrity is the application of the relationships established between primary and foreign keys. It's essentially saying the integrity of the data and the integrity of the references between the data, the references between the primary and the foreign keys. So, if you were to attempt to add an invoice with no customer name, you cannot create an invoice without a customer. It's pretty pointless because there's nowhere to send it. Your referential integrity rules would throw that back as an error, saying, if you want to create an invoice, you've got to create a customer. However, you could obviously create a customer without an invoice because you could have customers that you have not invoiced yet and you have not invoiced this month, etc., etc. Depends on the relationship between the primary and foreign key. That's referential integrity. It's the process of validating between primary and foreign key values between related tables. That's enough jargon for a relational database. For now.